Hello there, and of course, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, or Happy Kwanzaa, if any of those apply to you. Welcome to the weekly Outside Views magazine on American politics. The US government is targeting the Russian Navy with new sanctions because of Moscow's war of aggression against Ukraine. The US State Department announced on Thursday that several companies that provided the Navy with materials such as control systems were affected. The measures are directed against a Russian oceanology research center, a manufacturer of ship equipment, or a developer of navigation services. As a result of the sanctions, any assets in the US of those affected will be frozen. US citizens are prohibited from doing business with them. International business is also usually made much more difficult for those affected by the sanctions. The sanctions underscored a simple message, the ministry stressed. The Kremlin must end its brutal fight against Ukraine. Basically, Russia has so far shown no interest in constructive diplomacy to end this war. That's what US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said at a press conference. Ukraine faces a harsh winter as Kremlin chief Vladimir Putin's strategy is to freeze men, women, children, and the elderly to death. Russia must change course so that there is a chance of a just and lasting peace. We will stand by Ukraine for as long as it takes, said Blinken. In the dispute over Colombian tariffs on frozen fries from Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands, the EU says it has won a final victory. Arbitrators from the World Trade Organization, the WTO, have finally confirmed that the tariffs imposed by the South American country violate WTO rules and unjustifiably restrict access to the Colombian market. That's what the EU Commission announced in Brussels on Wednesday. The decision is a win for European producers and affects frozen fries exports worth well over 20 million euros a year. According to EU information, Colombia must now bring its custom rules in line with the verdict of the arbitrators. If the country refuses, the EU could seek permission to impose retaliatory tariffs. The US economy grew faster in the third quarter than previously assumed. The gross domestic product increased by 3.2% for the year, as announced by the Department of Commerce in Washington on Thursday. Before that, only an increase of 2.9% had been expected. In the second quarter, the world's largest economy even shrank by 0.6%. Despite increasing fears of a recession and a slump in the real estate market, robust growth is again expected for the fourth quarter that is drawing to a close. Economists surveyed by the Reuters news agency predict an increase of 2.7%. The guarantors for the upswing are the consumers, who are likely to have increased their consumption despite the high inflation, not least because of the savings accumulated during the pandemic. US consumer sentiment improved unexpectedly at the end of the year as inflation eased. The consumer sentiment barometer rose to 108.3 points in December from a revised 101.4 in November. That's what the Institute's conference board said on its survey. This is the best value since April. The reason for the improved consumer sentiment is evidence of an abating of high inflation. The inflation rate for goods and services fell to an annual low of 7.9% in November. According to the survey, the willingness to buy houses and large appliances continued to decrease. This is probably due to the sharp interest rate hikes by the US Federal Reserve, which, for example, have caused mortgage interest rates to skyrocket. The Fed recently raised interest rates by half a percentage point to the new range of 4.25% to 4.5%. Previously, they made 4 major rate hikes in a row by 0.75 percentage points each time. After the protests against the ousting of former Peruvian President Pedro Castillo, the Congress of the South American country has cleared the way for early elections. Parliament on Tuesday voted by a large majority in favor of a constitutional reform that would bring forward the 2026 presidential and congressional elections to April 2024. The reform still has to be approved by a two-thirds majority in the second reading. Interim President Dina Boluarte supported the initiative. At the beginning of the month, then President Castillo wanted to forestall a vote of no confidence and dissolve the Congress. Parliament then removed him from office. He was arrested on charges of an attempted coup and was remanded in custody. The supporters of the former village school teacher then took to the streets, and around 24 people were killed in clashes with the police. The US government has imposed new sanctions over the suppression of system-critical protests in Iran. The US Treasury Department said on Wednesday that the punitive measures would affect Iran's Attorney General Mohammad Jafar Montaseri and leaders of military and paramilitary groups. A company that manufactures equipment for the Iranian security forces is also a target of the sanctions. We condemn the increasing violence used by the Iranian regime against its own people who stand up for their human rights, said senior US Treasury Department official Brian E. Nelson. As a result of the US sanctions, possible possessions of those affected in the USA will be frozen. US companies and individuals are not allowed to do business with them. The sanctions are also likely to make international transactions more difficult, as many companies and banks shy away from doing business with sanctioned companies and individuals. Banks or people who still do business with them could also be sanctioned in a further step, as the US Treasury Department said. The Iranian security forces used violence against the protests. 2 demonstrators have been executed so far, and more than 500 have been killed during the demonstrations, according to human rights activists. And at least 18,000 demonstrators were arrested. The protests in Iran were triggered by the death of the Iranian Kurd Mahsa Amini. She died in police custody in September after being arrested by the morality police for breaking Islamic dress codes. After the increased occurrence of bird flu, especially in pelicans, the Ministry of Health of the South American crisis country Venezuela wants to proceed with an action plan for the prevention and treatment of the disease. The plan was developed together with the Ministry of Eco-Socialism, the Ministry of Science, and the Ministry of Agriculture, according to a tweet from the Ministry of Health in the capital Caracas on Friday evening. The Ministry of Health did not initially provide any further information. In early December, authorities in several Venezuelan states went on alert after scores of dead pelicans were found along the coast. Tests for the H5N1 virus were positive. The infected pelicans arrived in Venezuela during their annual winter migration, according to the government. And outbreaks of the virus in pelicans have also occurred in Peru and Ecuador, prompting bird flu warnings. Against the background of the Russian war of aggression in Ukraine, the US Senate has confirmed the new ambassador to Moscow with an overwhelming majority. The position will be held by experienced diplomat Lynn Tracy. US President Joe Biden nominated the diplomat in September. Senate Majority Leader, the Democrat Chuck Schumer, said Ambassador Tracy will play a crucial role in defying Russian President Vladimir Putin. Tracy, who speaks Russian, was previously the US ambassador to Armenia. Previously, she was senior advisor on Russia in the US State Department's Office of European and Eurasian Affairs and deputy ambassador to Moscow, according to the White House. The previous US ambassador to Moscow, John Sullivan, left Russia to retire in early September. The diplomat had repeatedly addressed authoritarian tendencies, judicial arbitrariness, and violations of human rights in Russia. And I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.